The gunshot wound in his shoulder had stopped bleeding 3 days ago, but Maxwell Irons knew the real damage was somewhere deeper, somewhere no doctor in Santa Rosa, California, could reach with their instruments and stitches. He sat alone in the back corner of the Silver Spur Saloon on that sweltering afternoon in July of 1876, nursing a whiskey he had no intention of finishing, watching the dust motes dance in the bars of sunlight that cut through the smoke-filled room. The war had ended 11 years ago, but Maxwell carried it with him like a second shadow. And now, after losing his younger brother to a senseless shootout just 2 weeks past, he wondered if there was any point in carrying on at all. The saloon doors swung open with their familiar creak, and Maxwell barely glanced up until he heard the sudden hush that fell over the room. A woman stood in the doorway, and even in his fog of grief, Maxwell could see she was terrified. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, hanging in disarray around a face that was pale except for the angry red mark blooming across her left cheek. Her dress, once fine but now dusty and torn at the hem, marked her as someone who had fallen far and fast. She clutched a small carpetbag to her chest like a shield, and her green eyes swept the room with the desperate look of a cornered animal. "Well, well," drawled a voice from near the bar. "Looks like Frank Garrett's pretty little wife finally ran off." Maxwell's jaw tightened. He knew Frank Garrett by reputation, a wealthy rancher who had moved to Santa Rosa 2 years ago and bought up half the land around town. He also knew the rumors about how Garrett treated his wife, though most folks turned a blind eye to such matters. A man's business with his wife was considered his own, even when that business left bruises. The woman's eyes found Maxwell's across the room, and something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, perhaps, though not of faces but of shared pain. She saw a man drowning, and he saw a woman running out of places to run. "Please," she said, her voice steadier than her hands. "I need help. My husband is coming, and if he finds me, the sentence died as the thunder of hoofbeats approached outside." The woman went impossibly paler, and her knees seemed to buckle. Maxwell found himself on his feet before he could think better of it, his chair scraping back loud in the silence. Every eye in the saloon turned to him, but he was already moving toward her. "Come with me," he said quietly, reaching her side. Up close, he could see more marks on her arms, fingerprint bruises in various stages of healing. His stomach turned, and something that had been dormant in him for weeks suddenly sparked to life. Anger, purpose, something other than grief. "Maxwell Irons," someone warned from the bar. "That is not your concern." "It is now," Maxwell replied, taking the woman's elbow gently. She flinched at first, then allowed him to guide her toward the back door of the saloon. They had just reached it when Frank Garrett burst through the front entrance. Garrett was a big man, well dressed in a way that spoke of money and the arrogance that came with it. His face was flushed with rage and liquor, and his hand rested on the pistol at his hip. "Fiona," he bellowed, his voice making the woman beside Maxwell tremble. "Get over here right now, woman. We are going home." Fiona Zimmerman, Maxwell thought, finally having a name for the terrified creature beside him. She shook her head mutely, unable to speak. "She is not going anywhere with you," Maxwell heard himself say. The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere he had thought was dead. His brother's face flashed in his mind, young Timothy who had always been too quick to jump into fights, too slow to walk away. Timothy had died protecting a stranger from 3 armed men, and though Maxwell had called it foolish at the funeral, he understood it now. Some things were worth fighting for, even when you had given up on yourself. Garrett's eyes narrowed. "You are Maxwell Irons. I heard your brother got himself killed playing hero. Seems stupidity runs in your family." He took a step forward. "That is my wife. She belongs to me, legal and proper. You have no right. She is a person, not property, Maxwell said, his hand moving toward his own weapon. The movement sent a spike of pain through his barely healed shoulder, but he ignored it. And she does not want to go with you. That seems clear enough. The tension in the room stretched tight as a wire. Several men at the bar exchanged glances, and Maxwell knew without looking that some of them would side with Garrett. Money bought loyalty in Santa Rosa, and Garrett had plenty of money. But Maxwell had nothing left to lose, and that made him dangerous in a different way. The barkeeper, an old man named Sullivan who had known Maxwell since he was a boy, cleared his throat. "Frank, maybe you should come back when you are sober. Talk this through proper-like." Garrett's hand tightened on his gun, and Maxwell prepared for what would come next. But then Fiona stepped forward, placing herself between the two men. Her voice, when she spoke, shook but held firm. "I am leaving you, Frank. I should have done it months ago. You can shoot me dead right here if you want, but I will never go back to that house. I will never let you touch me again." For a moment, Maxwell thought Garrett might actually draw his weapon. The man's face had gone purple with rage, and a vein throbbed in his temple. But then Sheriff Hawkins appeared in the doorway behind Garrett, his hand resting casually on his own gun belt. "Heard there might be trouble," Hawkins said mildly. He was a lean man in his 50s, fair-minded when it suited him and blind when that suited him better. Right now, his presence was enough to shift the balance. "Frank, I think you should go home and cool off. Whatever this is about can wait until tomorrow." Garrett looked between the sheriff, Maxwell, and his wife, clearly calculating his odds. Finally, he spat on the floor and jabbed a finger at Fiona. "This is not over. You are my wife, legal married. The law says you belong to me, and I will have what is mine." He turned on his heel and stormed out, leaving a wake of tension behind him. The sheriff watched him go, then turned to Maxwell and Fiona. "You two have made a mess here. Fiona, you know he is right about the law. A wife cannot just leave her husband, even if he beats her," Maxwell demanded. Hawkins sighed. "You know how these things are, Maxwell. It is complicated. A man has rights regarding his household." But his eyes, when they rested on Fiona, held something like pity. "But I suppose if a woman wanted to visit a friend for a few days, that is not illegal. And if that friend happened to be staying somewhere outside of town, well, that would be harder for a husband to find now, would it not?" It was the best they would get, and Maxwell knew it. He nodded slowly. "Thank you, Sheriff." Once Hawkins left, Maxwell turned to Fiona, suddenly aware that he had just thrown himself into a situation he was ill-equipped to handle. "I have a small cabin about 5 miles north of here, up in the hills. It is not much, but it is far from town and hard to find if you don't know the way. You can stay there." Fiona looked at him with those green eyes that held too much pain for someone who could not be more than 22 or 23 years old. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Maxwell thought about his brother, about the war, about all the people he had failed to save or protect. "Maybe I need to help someone," he said quietly. "Maybe that is the only thing that makes sense right now." They left through the back door as the saloon slowly returned to its normal rhythm behind them. Maxwell led Fiona to where his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, was tied. He helped her up into the saddle, trying not to notice how she flinched at his touch, then swung up behind her. The ride to his cabin was silent except for the steady clop of hooves and the rustle of wind through the dry grass. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by oak trees, with a creek running nearby. It had belonged to Maxwell's father, a place for quiet and solitude away from the ranch Maxwell and his brother had run together. Now the ranch was sold, Timothy was dead, and this cabin was all Maxwell had left. He helped Fiona down and led her inside, suddenly aware of how sparse and masculine the space was. A single room with a bed, a table, 2 chairs, a fireplace, and little else. "You can have the bed," Maxwell said. "I will sleep outside or on the floor." Fiona set down her carpetbag and looked around the cabin, then back at him. "You really expect nothing in return?" The question hit him like a physical blow as he understood what she was implying. "No," he said firmly. "I expect nothing. You are safe here, Mrs. Garrett. I give you my word." Something in her face crumbled then, and she sank into one of the chairs, her hands covering her face as sobs shook her shoulders. Maxwell stood frozen, uncertain what to do. He had been raised to never show weakness, to swallow grief and pain and carry on. But watching this woman fall apart in his cabin, he felt something crack open in his own chest. He knelt beside her chair, not touching but present. "You are safe now," he said softly. "I promise you are safe." It took a long time for her crying to subside. When it finally did, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and looked at him with raw honesty. "I married him because my father died and left debts. Frank paid them off in exchange for my hand. I thought I could endure it, thought maybe he would be kinder once we were wed. But he was worse. So much worse." She drew a shaky breath. "He said I was his property, that he could do whatever he wanted to me, and everyone in town looked the other way because he has money and power." Maxwell felt anger surge through him again, hot and righteous. "He is wrong. You are not property. You are a person, and you deserve to be treated with respect and kindness." Fiona laughed, a bitter sound. "Pretty words, but the law does not agree with you. I am his wife. If he wants to drag me back, the sheriff will help him do it eventually." "Then we will figure something else out," Maxwell said. "But tonight you rest. You are safe here." He stood and busied himself with practical matters, building a fire in the hearth even though the summer evening was warm, filling a kettle with water from his stores. Fiona watched him move around the cabin, and he could feel her eyes on him, assessing, trying to understand why a stranger would risk so much for her. "The man in the saloon said your brother died," she said finally. "I am sorry." Maxwell's hand stilled on the kettle. 2 weeks ago. 3 men were harassing a Chinese shopkeeper in town, pushing him around, threatening to burn his store. Timothy stepped in to stop them. He always did that, stepped in when he should have walked away. They shot him. "That is not walking away," Fiona said softly. "That is being brave. That is being a good man." "Good men die young," Maxwell said, the bitterness in his own voice surprising him. "I learned that in the war. The best men I knew, the ones with principles and courage, they all died. The rest of us just survived." He poured the water into 2 tin cups and brought one to her. "I came back from the war with this hole inside me. Timothy was the only thing that kept me going, kept me from putting a bullet in my own head some dark nights. And now he is gone, and I don't know what the point is anymore." Fiona took the cup, her fingers brushing his. "The point is people like me," she said quietly. "The point is standing up when others won't. Your brother knew that, and I think you know it too, even if you are hurting too much to feel it right now." They talked late into the night, 2 wounded souls finding unexpected comfort in shared honesty. Fiona told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her mother who died when she was young and her father who loved her but was terrible with money. She told him about the first time Frank hit her, 3 weeks after their wedding, and how she had made excuses for him until excuses became impossible. She told him about the growing fear that he might kill her one day, and how she had finally worked up the courage to run. Maxwell told her about the war, about things he had never spoken aloud to anyone, not even Timothy. He told her about the friends he had watched die, about the orders he had followed that still haunted him, about coming home to find that the world had moved on while he was stuck in 1865. He told her about the nightmares, about the way loud noises made him reach for a weapon that was not there, about the guilt of surviving when better men had not. When dawn began to lighten the sky, they were both exhausted but somehow lighter. Grief and trauma shared became a little more bearable, Maxwell discovered. He insisted Fiona take the bed while he made a pallet on the floor, and within minutes, he could hear her breathing even out into sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, and realized that for the first time since Timothy died, he wanted to see the next day. He wanted to make sure Fiona was safe. He wanted to hear her voice again, to see her smile if she ever could again. It was a fragile thing, this renewed purpose, but it was something. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Maxwell hunted and fished, providing food while Fiona cleaned the cabin and cooked meals that were far better than anything he had managed on his own. They talked constantly, sharing stories and thoughts, and slowly, carefully, beginning to trust each other. Maxwell found himself watching for her smile, listening for her laugh, and feeling his own wounded heart begin to remember what it was like to feel something other than pain. Fiona's bruises began to fade, and with them, some of her fear. She started to sleep without nightmares, started to relax when Maxwell came near. She began to see him not as a man to be wary of, but as someone genuinely kind, someone who was as broken as she was and understood what it meant to need gentleness. On the 5th day, Maxwell rode into Santa Rosa to get supplies and gauge whether Frank Garrett was still searching. What he found troubled him. Garrett had been to the sheriff multiple times, demanding his wife be returned to him. He had posted a reward for information about her whereabouts. He had made it clear that he considered Maxwell Irons a kidnapper and a criminal. Maxwell returned to the cabin with the supplies and the news. Fiona took it calmly, though he saw fear flicker in her eyes. "I will not go back to him," she said. "I would rather die." "You will not die and you will not go back to him," Maxwell promised, "but we need a plan. Garrett has money and influence. Eventually, he will find this place or force the law to act." They sat at the table, the evening shadows growing long around them. "I could go to San Francisco," Fiona said. "Disappear in a big city. He might not find me there." The thought of her leaving created a hollow feeling in Maxwell's chest that surprised him with its intensity. When had she become so important to him? When had these days together begun to feel like something he could not imagine losing? "San Francisco is dangerous for a woman alone," he said. "And you would need money, a place to stay, work." "I could manage," Fiona said, but her voice lacked conviction. Maxwell reached across the table and took her hand, the first time he had really touched her since that day in the saloon. Her fingers were small in his, and he felt her tremble slightly. "Or you could stay," he said quietly. "Not here, not in California, but we could go somewhere new together. Oregon, maybe, or Colorado. Somewhere Garrett's influence does not reach. Somewhere we could both start over." Fiona's eyes widened. "Together? Maxwell, you barely know me. Why would you uproot your entire life for a woman you met less than a week ago?" He held her gaze, letting her see the truth in his eyes. "Because in the past 5 days I have felt more alive than I have in years. Because when I am with you, the nightmares feel farther away and the grief does not choke me quite so badly. Because I think maybe we are healing each other, and I don't want to lose that." He paused, then added with complete honesty, "Because I am falling in love with you, Fiona Zimmerman, and I think maybe you feel something for me too." She did not pull her hand away. Instead, her eyes filled with tears, but these were different from the ones she had cried that first night. "I do feel something," she whispered, "but I am afraid. I am afraid of what I feel, afraid that I am confusing gratitude with something else, afraid that I will never be able to be a proper wife to any man after what Frank did to me." Maxwell stood and came around the table, kneeling beside her chair as he had that first night. "I don't need you to be a proper wife. I don't need anything from you except your company and your trust. What happened to you does not define you, Fiona. You are so much stronger and braver than you know." He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear. "And we have time. We can take as much time as you need, but I want you to know that when I look at you, I don't see someone broken or damaged. I see someone beautiful and resilient, someone who makes me want to be better than I have been." Fiona leaned into his touch, and when she kissed him, it was soft and tentative and full of hope. Maxwell kissed her back carefully, letting her control the pace, letting her know without words that she was safe with him. When they finally pulled apart, both were trembling. "Oregon," Fiona said, her voice steadier now. "Let us go to Oregon and start over together." They spent the next week preparing for the journey. Maxwell sold the last of his father's possessions, quietly converted what money he had into cash, and purchased supplies for the long trip north. He learned through careful questions in town that Garrett was growing increasingly frustrated and increasingly dangerous. The man had threatened several people he suspected of helping Fiona, and there were rumors he had hired men to search the hills. On their last night in the cabin, Maxwell and Fiona stood outside watching the stars. She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arms around her, feeling her warmth and solidity, and knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. "I used to think the future was just more of the past," Maxwell said quietly. "Just more grief and guilt and surviving, but now I think maybe it could be something else, something better." Fiona turned in his arms and looked up at him. "You saved me, Maxwell. Not just from Frank, but from giving up entirely. You showed me that not all men are cruel, that kindness still exists in this world." "You saved me too," he replied. "You gave me a reason to keep living when I had run out of reasons. You made me remember what it feels like to care about someone, to want to protect someone, to love someone." They kissed under the stars, and this time there was less fear and more promise. When they finally went inside, Fiona took Maxwell's hand and led him to the bed. "I want to try," she said softly. "I want to be close to you if you are patient with me." Maxwell was patient, infinitely patient. He let her set the pace, let her discover that touch could be gentle and connection could be healing. They learned each other slowly, carefully, and when morning came, they were truly together in every way that mattered. They left at dawn. 2 people on one horse with a pack mule trailing behind carrying all their worldly possessions. Maxwell took one last look at the cabin, then turned Copper's head north and did not look back. The journey to Oregon would take weeks, maybe months depending on the route and the weather. But Maxwell found himself looking forward to it, to the adventure of starting over with Fiona beside him. They had been traveling for 3 days when the riders found them. Maxwell spotted them first, 3 men on horseback pushing hard across the open grassland. He knew immediately who had sent them. "Hold on," he told Fiona, kicking Copper into a gallop. But the pack mule slowed them down and the riders were gaining. They reached a rocky outcropping and Maxwell pulled Copper to a halt, helping Fiona down quickly. "Get behind the rocks," he ordered, drawing his pistol. "Stay down and stay quiet." The 3 riders circled them at a distance. One of them called out, "Maxwell Irons. Frank Garrett wants his wife back. Give her up peaceable and we will let you ride away." "She is not going back to him," Maxwell called back. "Tell Garrett his wife is gone and he needs to accept that." One of the riders laughed. "That is not how this works, friend. A man has a right to his wife. Now we can do this easy or hard, but either way, the woman comes with us." Maxwell's finger tightened on the trigger, but he knew the odds. 3 against 1 and Fiona in the crossfire. His shoulder ached, a reminder that he was not at full strength. But he had made a promise to protect her, and he would keep that promise or die trying. The riders drew their weapons, and Maxwell prepared for what would come next. But before anyone could fire, a shot rang out from a different direction. One of the riders jerked and fell from his horse. The other two spun, confused, and two more shots followed in quick succession. Another rider fell, and the third, seeing his companions down, wheeled his horse and fled across the grassland. A figure emerged from behind a cluster of boulders, a rifle in hand. As he came closer, Maxwell recognized him as John Chen, the Chinese shopkeeper whose store Timothy had died defending. Chen was a slight man in his 40s, but the rifle in his hands was steady and his eyes were sharp. "Mr. Chen," Maxwell said, lowering his weapon. "What are you doing here?" Chen approached, checking the two downed men efficiently. One was dead, the other wounded but alive. "I heard talk in town," Chen said, his English accented but clear. "I heard Frank Garrett hired men to find you and the lady. I followed them." He looked at Maxwell steadily. "Your brother gave his life for me. I could not let his brother die without trying to repay that debt." Maxwell felt emotion tighten his throat. "Thank you. You saved both our lives just now." Chen nodded to where Fiona was emerging cautiously from behind the rocks. "You are good people. Good people should be protected." He gestured to the wounded man. "This one will tell Garrett what happened. It might make him think twice about sending more men." They tied up the wounded man, took the horses of the fallen riders, and left the bodies for the law to find. Chen rode with them for 2 more days, until they crossed into Oregon territory. When they reached the small town of Ashland, Chen prepared to turn back. "You should come with us," Maxwell urged. "Start fresh somewhere new." Chen smiled. "My life is in California, my store, my community. But you too, you have a chance at something new. Take it, be happy. That is the best way to honor your brother's memory." They said their goodbyes, and Maxwell knew he would never forget the debt he owed to John Chen. As they watched him ride south, Fiona took Maxwell's hand. "There is more good in this world than I remembered," she said. "More people willing to help when it matters." They continued north, following the trails and roads that led deeper into Oregon. The landscape changed around them, becoming greener and more lush as they left California behind. They passed through small towns and settlements, always cautious but gradually relaxing as the distance from Santa Rosa grew. In a town called Grant's Pass, they stopped to rest and resupply. While Maxwell was at the general store, Fiona explored the small main street and noticed a sign in a window. "Mrs. Patterson's boarding house for respectable ladies and gentlemen." Below it, a second sign read, "Help wanted, inquire within." When Maxwell found her, she was talking to a stout woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a practical manner. This was Mrs. Patterson, widow of a mine owner who ran her boarding house and managed several properties in town. "Your wife tells me you are looking for work and a place to stay," Mrs. Patterson said, looking Maxwell up and down with an assessing eye. "I could use a handyman, someone to maintain my properties and help with the heavy work. Room and board included plus a small wage, if you are interested." Maxwell glanced at Fiona, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. "We are interested," he said, "but I should be honest with you, Mrs. Patterson. Fiona and I are not married, not legally. She is running from a dangerous situation in California and I am helping her." Mrs. Patterson's eyes sharpened, but not with judgment. "I see. Well, what the law says and what is right are not always the same thing in my experience. If you two want to be together, that is your business. But if you are staying in my house, you will be married proper for appearances if nothing else. I have a reputation to maintain." Fiona paled. "But I am already married, to Frank Garrett back in Santa Rosa. I cannot marry Maxwell while that marriage still exists." Mrs. Patterson considered this. Well now, that is a problem, but not an insurmountable one. If a woman's husband is abusive and she has to flee for her life, and if she goes far enough away that he cannot find her, and if she takes a new name and starts a new life, well, who is to say otherwise? She looked between them. I am saying that if you two walked into the church down the street as Maxwell and Fiona Irons, siblings perhaps, and then in a few months you had a change of heart and decided to marry, no one here would question it. And what happens in California stays in California, if you understand me. It was not entirely legal, but it was a solution. Maxwell looked at Fiona and saw hope dawning in her eyes. What do you think? He asked her. I think Mrs. Patterson is very wise, Fiona said quietly. And I think I would very much like to be Fiona Irons officially and forever. They settled into life in Grants Pass with surprising ease. Maxwell proved to be skilled with repairs and maintenance, and Mrs. Patterson kept him busy with a steady stream of work. Fiona helped in the boarding house, cooking and cleaning and gradually coming out of her shell as she realized she was truly safe. The town accepted them without question. In the West, people were used to newcomers with mysterious pasts. As long as you worked hard and treated others fairly, no one pried too deeply. Maxwell and Fiona were known as siblings for exactly 2 months before Mrs. Patterson announced that she had witnessed a romance blooming under her roof. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning in 1876, in the small church where Mrs. Patterson attended services. It was a simple ceremony, with Mrs. Patterson and her friends as witnesses. Fiona wore a dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her sew, pale blue with white lace. Maxwell wore his best suit, his hair trimmed and his face clean-shaven. When the preacher asked if anyone objected to the union, Maxwell held his breath, half expecting Frank Garrett to somehow materialize in the doorway. But there was only silence, and then the preacher was pronouncing them man and wife, and Maxwell was kissing his bride with his whole heart. The reception was held in Mrs. Patterson's parlor, with food and music and genuine warmth. As Maxwell danced with Fiona, holding her close and feeling her laugh against his chest, he marveled at how much his life had changed. 6 months ago, he had been drowning in grief and guilt, seeing no future beyond the next bottle. Now he had a wife he loved desperately, a job that gave him purpose, and a life that felt worth living. That night, in the small room that was now theirs in the boarding house, Fiona undressed slowly, letting Maxwell see all of her. The bruises were long gone, replaced by healthy skin and the beginnings of curves that had been starved away by stress. "I love you," she said simply. "I did not think I would ever say those words to anyone and mean them, but I love you, Maxwell Irons. You gave me back my life." Maxwell kissed her deeply, pouring all his emotion into the connection. "You gave me back mine," he replied. "We healed each other, Fiona, and we will keep healing each other for the rest of our lives." Their marriage was everything Maxwell had never dared to dream of. Fiona was his partner in every way, someone who understood his darkness because she carried her own. They talked about everything, supported each other through nightmares and bad days, and celebrated the good days with genuine joy. The physical intimacy between them was tender and passionate by turns, and Fiona slowly let go of the fear that Frank had instilled in her. By spring of 1877, Fiona was pregnant. She told Maxwell one evening as they walked along the river that ran through Grants Pass, and he swept her up in his arms and spun her around until she was laughing and scolding him for being reckless. They talked about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the future they were building together. The baby, a boy they named Timothy Maxwell Irons, was born in December of 1877 with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Maxwell held his son for the first time and wept openly, thinking of the brother this child would never meet but whose name he would carry. Fiona, exhausted but glowing, reached up to wipe his tears. "He would be so proud of you," she said softly. "Your brother. He would be proud of the man you are, the father you will be." Maxwell kissed her forehead, then his son's. "I hope so. I hope I can be half the man Timothy was." "You already are," Fiona assured him. "You saved me. You gave me a life I never thought I could have. You are my hero, Maxwell Irons, and you will be our son's hero too." Life continued to unfold with its mixture of challenges and joys. Mrs. Patterson grew fond of little Timothy and often volunteered to watch him so Maxwell and Fiona could have time together. The boarding house remained their home for 2 more years, until Maxwell had saved enough to purchase a small house on the edge of town with room for a garden and space for their growing family. Fiona gave birth to their second child, a daughter named Eleanor Grace, in the autumn of 1880. Eleanor had her father's serious temperament and her mother's resilient spirit. Timothy, now nearly 3, was fascinated by his baby sister and appointed himself her protector from the start. Maxwell worked hard, taking on additional jobs as a carpenter and builder as Grants Pass continued to grow. His reputation for honest work and fair dealing brought him steady employment, and the family prospered modestly. Fiona took in sewing and helped with the books for several local businesses, her quick mind for numbers proving valuable. They became pillars of the small community, known for their kindness and their willingness to help others. When a family lost their home to fire, Maxwell led the effort to rebuild it. When a widow needed help with her harvest, Fiona organized the town's women to assist. They paid forward the help they had received, remembering always that they had been saved by the compassion of strangers. In the summer of 1883, a man came to town asking questions about a couple who had arrived some years back, a man and woman from California. Maxwell heard about it from a friend and immediately went on guard. He came home that evening to find Fiona playing with the children in the yard, and his heart clenched with fear at the thought of losing this life they had built. "Someone is asking questions," he told Fiona that night after the children were asleep. "Someone from California." Fiona's face went pale, but her voice was steady. "Frank, I don't know. Could be him, could be someone he sent. I will find out tomorrow." But the next day the stranger found Maxwell first. He was an older man, well-dressed, with tired eyes and an official-looking document case. He introduced himself as Henry Zimmerman, Fiona's uncle on her father's side. Maxwell's hand went to his gun, but Henry held up his hands peacefully. "I am not here to cause trouble, Mr. Irons. May I speak with my niece?" They met in the parlor of the Irons house, with Maxwell standing protectively beside Fiona as Henry Zimmerman explained why he had come. "Frank Garrett died 6 months ago," he said bluntly. "Fell from his horse while drunk and broke his neck. I came to tell you, Fiona, that you are free, legally free. His estate is being settled, and as his widow you are entitled to a portion." Fiona stared at him, the information not quite sinking in. "He is dead, Henry confirmed. "I am sorry I could not find you sooner to tell you. I tried after your father died to help you. But by the time I learned what Garrett was truly like, you had already run. I have been searching for you for years." Tears streamed down Fiona's face, and she leaned into Maxwell's side. "I am free," she whispered. "Truly free." Henry smiled gently. "You are. And from what I can see, you have built a good life here. I don't need to know the details of how, but I am glad you found safety and happiness." He pushed an envelope across the table. "This is your inheritance from Garrett's estate. It is not a fortune, but it is enough to make a difference. After Henry left, promising to stay in touch and visit again, Maxwell and Fiona sat together in stunned silence. Finally, Fiona spoke. "I thought I would feel relief, and I do. But I also feel sad. Sad that Frank was so broken that he became a monster. Sad for the years I spent being afraid. Sad that it took him dying for me to truly be free." Maxwell pulled her close. "You are allowed to feel complicated things about complicated situations. But Fiona, you were already free. You freed yourself the day you walked into that saloon. Everything that came after, that was you choosing life over fear. Garrett dying just makes it official." She looked up at him, this man who had saved her and loved her and built a life with her. "I would still choose this," she said firmly. "Even if Frank had lived, even if we could never be legally married, I would still choose you and this life. Always." They used the money from Garrett's estate to expand their house and put some away for their children's future. Life continued to bring its mixture of joys and sorrows. Mrs. Patterson passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1885, leaving a generous bequest to the Irons family in gratitude for their years of friendship and help. More children came, a third son named Joseph in 1884 and another daughter, Catherine, in 1887. The house filled with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of a large family. Maxwell, watching his children play in the yard, often thought about how close he had come to ending his own life in the dark days after Timothy's death. The thought made him hold his wife a little tighter, thank God a little more fervently for second chances. As the years passed, the nightmares that had plagued both Maxwell and Fiona became less frequent. The wounds they had carried, both physical and emotional, healed into scars that were part of their story but no longer defined them. They had healed together, just as Fiona had predicted that first night in the cabin, and in healing had built something stronger than either could have managed alone. On a summer evening in 1890, Maxwell and Fiona sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the Oregon sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their children were inside, the older ones helping the younger ones prepare for bed. The sounds of their family drifted out through the open windows, a symphony of belonging. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Fiona asked, her hand in Maxwell's. "If I had not run that day, if you had not been in the saloon, if you had not decided to help me." Maxwell considered this. "I think about it sometimes. I think about how I was planning to drink myself to death, how I had given up on everything, and then you walked through those doors and something in me woke up again." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You saved my life, Fiona, just as much as I saved yours." "We saved each other," Fiona corrected. "That is what love does. It saves us from ourselves and shows us what we are capable of becoming." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and the stars began to emerge. Inside, they could hear Timothy, now 12, reading a story to his younger siblings. His voice was clear and strong, and Maxwell felt a surge of pride for the young man his son was becoming. "I am happy," Maxwell said quietly, the words simple but profound. "For the first time in my life I can say that without reservation. I am truly happy." Fiona leaned her head on his shoulder. "So am I. After everything we have been through, all the pain and fear and struggle, we found our way to this, to peace, to love, to home. To healing," Maxwell added, wrapping his arm around her. "Together." As they sat together under the Oregon stars, surrounded by the life and love they had built from the ashes of their broken pasts, both Maxwell and Fiona knew that they had found what so many people searched for and never found. They had found someone who understood their darkness and helped them walk toward the light. They had found someone who needed them as much as they needed to be needed. They had found each other in a dusty saloon in California when both were at their lowest points, and together they had climbed to heights neither had dreamed possible. The scars remained. Maxwell still had nightmares sometimes about the war, and Fiona still flinched occasionally at sudden movements. But these were reminders of how far they had come, not anchors holding them back. They had transformed their trauma into tenderness, their pain into purpose, their brokenness into a bond that nothing could sever. Years later, when their grandchildren asked how they had fallen in love, Maxwell and Fiona would exchange a look full of shared memory and understanding. Then one of them would begin the story of a wounded cowboy and a desperate woman who met in a saloon one hot July day in Santa Rosa, California, and discovered that sometimes the people who need healing the most are the ones best equipped to heal each other. They would tell of danger and flight, of kindness from unexpected sources, of building a new life from nothing but hope and determination. And they would end with the truth that sustained them through every challenge. That love, real love, was not just about passion and romance, but about choosing every day to support and cherish and heal the person who had chosen you in return. Their marriage lasted 53 years, until Maxwell passed peacefully in his sleep in 1929 at the age of 78. Fiona followed him just 6 months later, and their children said she had simply decided she was ready to be with him again. They were buried side by side in the Grants Pass Cemetery, their headstone reading, Maxwell and Fiona Irons, beloved parents and grandparents, who taught us that healing is possible when we heal together. But on that summer evening in 1890, with their whole future still ahead of them, Maxwell and Fiona simply sat together on their porch, holding hands and watching the stars emerge one by one. They had survived. They had healed. They had found love in the unlikeliest of places at the darkest of times. And they had built a life that honored both the pain they had endured and the joy they had discovered in each other's arms. It was, they both agreed, more than enough. It was everything.